She aged that much in 10, 11 years? Holy crap. She used to be pretty, if I may say so.
But little did he know that throughout his entire routine that morning, he was being followed by two hired hitmen. The defendant portrayed Dan Markel to Charlie Adelson as a crazy person who was impossible to deal with.
Wendy just throws her own mother under the bus and... You must follow the law. The law says...
Glorious. Is it a lawsuit? Probably. Why not?
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Buckle Up, It's the Law with attorney Larry Forman. Folks, today we are going to be doing the Donna Adelson jury trial opening statements by the prosecution, parts 1 and 2. Both are going to premiere today. Obviously, this part at 4 p.m. that you are watching right now, and at 7 p.m. both in Eastern Time. We're going to continue with the second portion of the prosecution's opening, and then tomorrow we're going to conclude the opening and the defense's opening as well, starting with the first witness on this channel on Friday. So, without further ado, let's dive right in, shall we?
Is the state prepared to give its opening statement at this time? You may proceed.
Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Sarah Catherine Dugan. Georgia Kappelman and I are representing the state of Florida in this case. And this is the defendant, Donna Adelson. We see her here at the defense table. And this is how she appeared back in 2014 when this crime occurred 11 years ago. And the reason that we're here today is because this defendant, Donna Adelson, was part of a conspiracy to hire a hitman to kill her former son-in-law.
Wait a second. I'm sorry. She aged that much in 10, 11 years? Holy crap. She used to be pretty, if I may say so. She used to be like an attractive woman, you know, fairly decent looking, if I may say so myself. And now she's just aged so much. I mean, that's what being part of a conspiracy to commit murder, I guess, ages you. And again, I'm not trying to convict her before she's convicted by a jury, but the signs are pointing to the fact that she probably had something to do with it, and we're going to find out what it is with the prosecution's opening. So let's keep going.
This murder was set into motion because back in 2014, this defendant's family had a big problem. And the big problem was Dan Markel. And the solution to that problem was the defendant's son, Charlie Adelson. Charlie Adelson was the solution because he had a girlfriend with connections to the type of people who were willing and capable of pointing a gun at a complete stranger and pulling the trigger. The victim in this case, Dan Markel, was known as Danny to his friends and family. He was a loving father to two little boys, and he was a highly respected law professor at Florida State University College of Law. Tragically, on July 18th of 2014, Dan Markel was shot in the head in broad daylight in the driveway of his home in the Benton Hills neighborhood here in Tallahassee. The last day of his life began like any other day of his that summer. He woke up, he took his two young sons to preschool, and then he went to the gym to work out. After finishing his workout, he returned home, he pulled into his driveway, and he opened his garage. But little did he know that throughout his entire routine that morning, he was being followed by two hired hitmen who traveled all the way to Tallahassee from Miami for the sole purpose of taking his life. And like something out of a horror movie, when he pulled into his driveway, the killers pulled in right behind him. Moments later, Dan Markel's neighbor heard a gunshot, and he looked out the window and saw a light-colored Toyota Prius back quickly out of Dan Markel's driveway and speed away. The neighbor thought that was very unusual, very suspicious, so he waited a second to see if Dan Markel also backed out of his driveway or came out of his house. And when he didn't see him, the neighbor got, a very funny feeling. And he went over to Dan Markel's open garage to see if there was anything wrong. And he found a gruesome scene. Dan Markel's car window, his driver's side window, was shattered. His glasses and his phone were on the ground next to his car. And Dan Markel was behind the wheel. He was unresponsive and moaning and terribly injured. The neighbor called 911 and law enforcement arrived to find Dan Markel with a gunshot wound to the head. He was taken to the hospital where he survived for about 14 hours before he was pronounced dead. Dan Markel was only 41 years old. And his little boys, who were deprived of their father after this murder, were just 3 and 4 years old. Law enforcement began to investigate to try to figure out who did this, who shot Dan Markel. The scene there, the crime scene, left no trace of the killers. There was no fingerprints, no DNA, no bullet casing, nothing was stolen. And so police began to suspect that this may be a professional killing. The little evidence that they do have sends them down 2 separate paths. One path is to track down that light-colored Prius that the neighbor saw fleeing from the scene. And the other is to identify who was inside that Prius. And the other path relates to motive.
Right.
Who in Dan Markel's life would hate him enough to hire a professional?
Because why? People don't just kill other people for no reason. There's always a reason, obviously. So, of course, very, very smart, very important point by the prosecution.
And after years of tireless investigation, both of these paths led directly to this defendant.
I'm sorry, I still can't get over how much she's changed. I know it's been 10 years, I know she's in her mid-70s, but she is 65 here, or 64, right? She looks young, she looks vibrant, she looks happy. She has changed. She has aged 50 years in the last decade.
First, let's talk about the path involving motive. We'll go down both paths this morning. Police investigated Dan Markel's personal life to try to figure out a motive in this case, to see who might want him dead. And they learned that Dan Markel was entangled in a very nasty divorce with his ex-wife, who is the defendant's daughter. And his ex-wife is named Wendy Adelson. A review of the divorce case file reveals that Wendy Adelson had asked the court to allow her to relocate to Miami, where she was from and where her parents lived, with her children, and Dan Markel's children, in order to be closer to her mother, Donna Adelson, to her father, whose name is Harvey Adelson, and to her brother, whose name is Charlie Adelson. The victim, Dan Markel, as y'all can imagine, is adamantly opposed to this, to his children being relocated to Miami. He works here in Tallahassee. He's a law professor here in Tallahassee. This is where he lives. This is where his kids have been raised. He wants his children here with him. A review by law enforcement of Wendy Adelson's emails made it clear that her mother, the defendant, hated Dan Markel and was the relentless driving force behind Wendy's relocation efforts to South Florida. And, being a caring and involved parent is great, but the defendant's participation in her children's lives went beyond mere involvement or even meddling. She was extremely controlling. She had very strong opinions about all the decisions in Wendy Adelson's life, whether it be about her career, her relationships, or even purchasing a home. And if Wendy Adelson would not do as the defendant wanted her to do, the defendant often then enlisted Charlie Adelson, her son, Wendy's brother, to solve the problem by getting him to kind of go to Wendy and persuade Wendy until Wendy ultimately agreed to do what the defendant wanted her to do. And while the defendant had always been controlling of her children's lives, the emails uncovered by law enforcement showed that this defendant was desperate to find a way for Wendy and Dan Markel's children, her grandchildren, to be able to relocate to Miami. The defendant told Wendy that she deserved more than just a life teaching in Tallahassee without her family, and that Dan Markel was essentially holding her hostage in Tallahassee because of his job. During the divorce and custody battle, the defendant's email showed that she was heavily involved in Wendy's court case, even going so far as to draft and edit the documents that Wendy and her attorney were filing in court. And emailing Wendy instructions for her attorney, on arguments her attorney.
Okay, so this is interesting. So Donna Adelson was not just manipulating and controlling on the sidelines. She was actively involved in the editing process of any motions that the attorney may have wanted to file or was going to file, etc., in court during the custody battle. That's really interesting. It's quite revealing as to the level of the grasp that Donna Adelson had over Wendy. And Wendy gave in because it was like, well, it's my mom, so I'm going to listen to her, I guess, rather than trying to probably keep her distance, which would have been the better option. But obviously she didn't know what it was going to lead to. But anyway, let's keep watching.
You should make and what her attorney should do. Mm-hmm. The defendant would guilt trip Wendy Adelson about how much time she and her husband, Harvey Adelson, were having to spend away from their dental practice to visit Wendy and the grandkids in Tallahassee, and complain about how the family was losing income, losing patients because of their constant absences from the practice. And the defendant instructed Wendy Adelson that relocation to Miami was the most important priority in this divorce, and if it had to be her non-negotiable in the divorce. In June of 2013, the judge in the divorce case ended up ruling in Dan Markel's favor. And not only did the judge deny Wendy's relocation motion, but the judge dismissed it in a way that prevented Wendy Adelson from requesting the relocation again. So Wendy would not be permitted to move to Miami.
They were left with no options.
To be close to the defendant and her husband, with the children at that time or ever, unless of course something happened to Dan Markel. After the judge denied the relocation motion, after that was denied, the defendant told Wendy Adelson in emails that Dan Markel has not beaten the Adelson family yet. She let Wendy know that the Adelson family is a team and they are trying to win. Donna Adelson suggested in her emails several bribes to get Dan Markel to agree to relocation, like plane tickets, paying for her grandson's education, and the defendant even suggested offering Dan Markel a $1 million bribe to allow the relocation, to let Wendy move to Miami with the boys. And if the bribes didn't work, the defendant also suggested several ways that Wendy could threaten or bully Dan Markel into submission. The defendant told Wendy to aggravate Dan Markel like he aggravates you. And the defendant set out a plan of action that the defendant told Wendy would make Dan Markel absolutely miserable. And she's detailing all of these in her emails. So, for the plan of action, the defendant knew that Dan Markel was devoutly Jewish. So she came up with the idea for Wendy to pose Dan Markel's sons for pictures in front of a Catholic church, and then post the pictures to social media, and even announce on social media she was getting the children baptized, just to make it appear to Dan Markel that she was changing their religion.
Wow.
The defendant assured Wendy Adelson that this would all be an act to get Dan Markel to agree to let her move to Miami, but told Wendy Adelson that in order to pull off this stunt, she had to put on the acting performance of her life. The defendant said that it did not matter to her if Wendy had to dress her two little toddlers up in Nazi or SS uniforms, as long as she was able to get them to South Florida and show Dan Markel that he was not in control. The defendant repeatedly told Wendy Adelson that the rest of her life, meaning Wendy's life, as well as the defendant's life, Harvey Adelson's life, and Charlie Adelson's life, depended on Wendy Adelson and the boys being able to relocate to Miami. And the defendant said that she would never, never, never give up and never stop fighting for Wendy and the boys to be relocated to Miami.
Damn, this is bad.
And she never did. The evidence in this case will show you that this defendant's closest confidant was her son, Charlie Adelson. She and Charlie Adelson talk multiple times a day, every day. And he was the person with whom she would constantly vent and complain to about Wendy's situation here in Tallahassee, having to live in Tallahassee with her sons. And she would often, the defendant would use very dramatic life and death terms to describe it. The defendant portrayed Dan Markell to Charlie Adelson as a crazy person who was impossible to deal with and was causing an extreme amount of stress to Donna Adelson and her husband, Harvey Adelson. And Charlie Adelson was also the person that Donna Adelson relied on to solve her problems. And her daughter and grandsons having to live 8 hours away in Tallahassee was a big, big problem for this defendant. And this defendant made it Charlie Adelson's problem to solve. Mm-hmm. And although the divorce between Wendy and Dan Markell was final a year before the murder, throughout that year, litigation is still ongoing, to say the least. Each side is continuing to routinely file violations of the custody agreement, violations of the settlement agreement, and that continued right up until Dan Markell's death in 2014. A few months before the murder in 2014, Dan Markell alleged that the defendant, Donna Adelson, was disparaging him to his children. He was very worried about her trying to alienate him from his children. She was doing this by calling him stupid in front of the boys and telling the boys that Dan Markell was trying to take them away from her. Dan Markell asked the court to prevent this defendant from having unsupervised contact with her grandchildren. And this motion was still pending in court when Dan Markell was killed. And the murder of Dan Markell ensured that not having access to her grandchildren would never be a problem for this defendant. And what do you know? About 48 hours after Dan Markell was killed, after the shooting happened, Wendy Adelson and the little boys relocated to Miami, moved into the defendant's home with her, and the boys started school down the street. And just like that, their father was effectively erased from their lives, and the Adelsons' big problem had been solved. You'll hear during this trial that the Adelson family is a very tight-knit family. The defendant, her son Charlie Adelson, and her husband Harvey Adelson actually all worked together at their family's dental practice. The defendant, Harvey Adelson and Charlie Adelson are dentists there, and the defendant managed their accounts at the office. She was the details person. And this defendant, though, she managed much more than just the office for the Adelson family. She was the matriarch, and a domineering one at that. She ran the office, the home, and the lives of the Adelson family members. After Dan Markell was killed, law enforcement interviewed Wendy Adelson. Wendy Adelson told police, and the police confirmed this, that she was at home having her TV fixed, at her home in Tallahassee, having her TV fixed at the time of Dan Markell's murder. And when police asked her, well, do you know anyone who would have a motive to kill Dan Markell? Wendy Adelson acknowledged that her family had a motive to want Dan Markell dead, and said that her parents had more reason to dislike Dan Markell than anybody else.
Wow, wait a second. So Wendy just throws her own mother under the bus. And sorry, I did watch a little bit ahead, but you will see Wendy testified, and I believe, as you will see, she does not hold any punches. She does not pull any punches, folks. For those of you who watched the first video I made in this series, you already know that Wendy has not been charged, and she's testifying under immunity in this case. So this is big. They're going after Donna. Donna is their big fish. I mean, we have a lot of people already incarcerated. We got Catherine, we've got the two hitmen, so they're all in prison. And Donna is next. Donna is next on the chopping block.
Interview. Police allowed Wendy Adelson to make a phone call to her parents to let them know that Dan Markel had been shot. And after she got off the phone with her mother, the defendant, Wendy Adelson said to police, "Well, they acted surprised, so that's a relief." And when asked by law enforcement if anyone could have killed Dan Markel on her behalf, she also told the police about her brother, Charlie Adelson. Wendy admitted to police that her brother, Charlie Adelson, had joked that he looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel.
Oh, that's a bomb drop. And of course, on that note, we are going to stop it right here and we'll resume it in just a few hours so you don't have to wait that long, folks. I promise you, we are going to continue this series. We're going to continue the prosecution's opening in the Donna Adelson case, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, everybody.